Collected Essays of Valerie Lynn Stevens. Critical Thinking. Preface. First off, I must apologize in advance for the tone of this first paragraph, at least the first few sentences. I will not, however, apologize for the truths which they seek to illuminate upon. But here goes. Apparently, some folks in this world seem to mistake being critical for critical thinking. The ability to make instantly negative and derogatory assumptions about people and or what they do and or say, why they do and or say, doth not a circumspect and erudite observer make. In fact, this merely makes them look, at least to a truly discerning and critical thinker, like a complete and utter jackass. And if you've ever noticed, their criticisms are rarely, if ever, even based on accuracy or truth. And this is just another reason why they are annoying, because they are illogical and inaccurate. Mind you, I understand that sometimes people are just under a lot of stress or having a bad day, but I refer to those individuals who seem to have worked hard at making these traits an ingrained part of their very being. Like most critical thinkers, I judge people based on what is consistently displayed regarding their attitudes and behaviors, for better and or for worse. And even then, I believe everyone to be blessed by our Lord with something called freedom of will and or choice, and extend them the benefit of the doubt that they might at some point make a sincere and concerted effort to improve upon themselves, psycho-spiritually, as Carl Gustav Jung would have said. We all, no matter how wretched, have redeeming qualities. Thus, I might erect a good fence towards a transgressive individual, but I will also remain open to a later addition to that fence, say a nice little gate, or even a wheelchair-accessible ramp leading to the house of my psyche, for those who may suffer from mental, emotional handicaps. Nevertheless, all are still working at our own rehabilitation. Because let's face it, we're all damaged goods. It's what you do with what you've been with that counts. But all Chestertonian and cheeky metaphors aside, let's explore what critical thinking actually is and why it is so indispensable to anyone's education. In fact, this is one area which is sorely lacking in most schools for young adults. And quite beautifully, an analysis of critical thinking is one entity which applies its own very principles in its dissection without nullifying or obscuring the results of said dissection. It is the mind pondering its own self, or metacognition, if you will. So, let's begin. Below are some of the criteria for honing one's critical thinking skills in ways which enrich not only one's own world, both inner and outer, but the worlds of our fellow human beings as well, whenever we interact with them utilizing said skills and intelligence. Because when we help ourselves, we are helping one another without immediately realizing it. Oh, and by the way, I myself mainly taught my own self how to develop my critical thinking skills. I was never presented a formula or a spreadsheet or a lesson book on such a thing. I think I personally picked it up merely through a love of learning in general and through being a voracious reader. Reading comprehension is also another area that is indispensable to one's formal education, which many schools seem to also be lacking in. When I was a tutor, many of my students who had been labeled that way by our educational system were not dumb in the least. I noticed instead that what they struggled with in regards to their study books and lesson formats, etc., was reading comprehension. For example, I was helping someone get her high school diploma, and she needed help with some of the questions in her history book. It wasn't that she failed to apply herself. In fact, she was one of the most motivated students I'd come across. She truly wanted to learn it and understand it. It was that she had trouble with understanding what the question was asking of her, as far as what the answer was guiding her to arrive upon through her own deductions. This is just a small example of how critical thinking and encouraging our children to use their minds to explore things for themselves is so paramount. Mind you, the ability to think in a really abstract way doesn't begin to develop until about middle school age, and maybe a little later for some. But one's whole life itself, in so many other ways, can be adversely affected by a failure to either be guided in that direction by someone else or to be disinclined to do so for oneself. Yes, it is true that not everyone is naturally intellectual or introspective, but I believe that every human individual is intrinsically gifted in each our own ways, both intellectually and or in some other way less cerebral, perhaps more physical. Nevertheless, in continuum, training the mind in how to think is kind of the actual point behind getting an education, or at least it should be. It's not so much a matter of merely learning a rote bunch of facts and figures that we probably won't remember 5 years from now unless we use it on a daily basis anyhow, but rather it is meant to exercise the intellectual faculties, to build up brawn in the brain, if you will. But that is discourse for another essay, perhaps. This piece is in no way meant to be a scholarly treatise concerning pedagogy, logic, and or epistemology or any such thing as we are taught in the realms of philosophy. It's just meant to be a more accessible guide to the realm of the miraculous and fascinating, and often frustrating and even disturbing, organ that is the human brain. Or in this case, the human mind is more apropos, since we will be exploring some of its more saliently abstruse functions and features, or as we refer to it in plain English, critical thinking faculties. And again, although there are certainly principles which can be applied, we mainly learn the skill by practicing it in daily life and engaging in a conscientious and responsible way with both the world inside of ourselves and with the world outside of ourselves.